The rain hammered against the funeral home windows like accusations I couldn't answer. I stood alone beside Mom's casket, my fingers tracing the smooth mahogany edge, while Lyra and Jax whispered in the corner. Their voices carried just enough for me to catch fragments. Something about property values, something about timing. I pressed my palm flat against the wood, feeling its coolness seep into my skin, and tried to remember the last thing Mom had said to me. It was about the trees, always about the trees. She had told me that trees know who tells lies. Lyra's heels clicked across the floor as she approached, her black dress probably costing more than I made in a month at the bookstore. Jax followed, his hand possessive on her lower back, his eyes scanning me with the same calculation he might use when flipping through real estate listings. They didn't ask how I was doing. They didn't ask if I needed anything. The will reading happened 3 days later, in Mr. Harrison's office, a musty room lined with law books that probably hadn't been opened since before I was born. The lawyer cleared his throat, adjusted his reading glasses, and began the formal recitation. I barely heard most of it. The words washed over me like white noise until my name cut through the fog. Harper Elizabeth Crane, the sole beneficiary of the cabin at Willow Creek. Lyra's coffee cup clattered against its saucer. The sound echoed in the sudden silence like a gunshot. What? Her voice cracked on the single syllable. Just her? I'm Mom's daughter too. Jax leaned forward, his jaw tight. This doesn't make sense. We need to review this. There must be some mistake. Mr. Harrison looked at them over his glasses with the patient expression of someone who had witnessed countless family dramas unfold in this very room. I assure you, the will is ironclad, Mrs. Crane was very specific about her wishes. The property in Willow Creek goes entirely to Harper. I sat frozen, clutching the folder of documents Mr. Harrison had slid across his desk. The paper felt crisp under my fingertips, official and final. I looked up to find Lyra staring at me with naked fury, all pretense of grief stripped away. Jax's face had gone red, a vein pulsing at his temple. I didn't say anything, not a single word. I just met their stares with a calm I didn't quite feel and wondered how long they had been waiting for this moment. How long had they been counting on Mom's death to solve their financial problems? The thought made my stomach turn. The drive to Willow Creek took 4 hours, winding through increasingly dense forest until civilization felt like a distant memory. I had planned to take a few days before heading up there, to prepare myself for the flood of memories that would come with walking through that door again. But as I rounded the final bend in the gravel road, my plans evaporated. A U-Haul truck sat in the driveway. I pulled up slowly, watching in disbelief as Lyra directed Jax, who was hauling a large suitcase toward the front porch. My front porch. The door stood open, swallowing their belongings like a hungry mouth. I got out of my car, my legs unsteady, and walked toward them. Lyra noticed me first. She set down the box she was carrying and smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Hey, little sister. Her voice dripped with false sweetness. Mom wouldn't want this place sitting empty, would she? I stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, my hand gripping the railing. This is my house. Jax emerged from inside, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. Come on, Harper. We're family. We can take care of it together. It's too much for one person anyway. His tone was condescending, the way you might speak to a child who didn't understand how the adult world worked. I felt something cold settle in my chest, something that pushed back against the grief that had been consuming me for days. I didn't invite you here, I said quietly. Lyra laughed, a sharp sound that startled a crow from the nearby pine tree. Don't be dramatic. Look, we're already here. We drove all this way. Just let us stay for a bit while we figure things out. Our lease is up anyway, and this place is huge. I watched them for a long moment, watched the way Jax's eyes kept darting to the house, cataloging, assessing, watched the way Lyra's smile stayed frozen on her face, daring me to challenge her. And I made a decision, not to fight them, not yet, but to let them think they had won. Fine, I said, walking past them into the house. Make yourselves comfortable. Behind me, I heard Lyra exhale in relief. She had no idea what she had just walked into. The cabin smelled like Mom, pine and lavender and the faint vanilla of the candles she always burned in the evenings. Every surface held memories. The kitchen table where we had eaten countless breakfasts. The armchair by the fireplace where she would read to me when I was small. The windowsill lined with her collection of smooth river stones. I went to my old room and closed the door, leaning against it as I finally let myself breathe. Through the thin walls, I could hear them moving around, claiming space that wasn't theirs. I heard Jax's heavy footsteps in what had been Mom's study. I heard Lyra's voice, bright with satisfaction, saying something about rearranging the furniture. I pulled out my phone and opened a notes app, my thumbs flying across the screen. If they wanted to play this game, I would play it better. I would play it smarter. And by the time I was done, they would regret ever setting foot in Willow Creek. The first 2 weeks were a study in restraint. Lyra and Jax moved through the house like they owned it, making changes without asking, treating me like an inconvenient guest. Jax took over Dad's old armchair, the one with the worn leather arms that still held the shape of his body. He would sit there for hours, flipping through channels on the television, his feet propped on the coffee table. Mom had refinished herself. Lyra was worse. She went through the house with the eye of someone planning renovations, making little tsking sounds at Mom's decorating choices. One morning, I came downstairs to find her standing in front of the fireplace mantel, her hands full of framed photographs. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She turned, startled, nearly dropping a picture of Mom and me from my college graduation. "Oh, Harper, I was just thinking we should update the decor. This place feels so dated. All these old photos everywhere, it's depressing." I crossed the room and took the frame from her hands. "Every single thing in this house has value. If you can't respect that, don't touch it." Jax looked up from his phone, his expression amused. "Jesus, it's just some old pictures. You're being dramatic." The word dramatic. They kept using it, trying to make me feel like my reactions were unreasonable, that my grief was inconvenient. I set the photograph back on the mantel, making sure it was exactly where Mom had kept it, and walked away before I said something I would regret. But that night, alone in my room, I began setting up the first camera. It was small, no bigger than a button, easily hidden in the decorative molding near the ceiling. The company promised excellent night vision and crystal clear audio. I positioned it to capture most of the living room and the entrance to the kitchen. Over the next few days, I installed 5 more. One in the hallway outside the bedrooms, one in the kitchen itself, one on the back porch where Lyra and Jax often sat in the evenings, drinking Mom's wine and discussing their plans. I placed them carefully, checking and rechecking the angles on my phone. The app showed me multiple views of my home, now documented and recorded. Then I found the laptop. Lyra had left it open on the kitchen table while she took a shower. I hadn't meant to look. Or maybe I had. Maybe some part of me already knew what I would find. The screen glowed with a half-written real estate listing. Charming, rustic cabin on 10 acres in Willow Creek. Excellent investment opportunity. Motivated seller. My hands shook as I scrolled through her email. Messages to a real estate agent named Patricia Chen. Discussions about comparable properties. Questions about the fastest way to close a deal. How to establish joint ownership. Whether a handwritten agreement would hold up if the actual owner was difficult. They were planning to steal my house. Not just stay here. Not just take advantage of my hospitality. They were actively plotting to take the only thing Mom had left me. I took screenshots of everything, my heart pounding so hard I thought they might hear it upstairs. I sent the images to my own email, then carefully returned the laptop to exactly how Lyra had left it, the cursor blinking in the same spot. When she came back downstairs, her hair wet and smelling of Mom's shampoo, I was sitting at the table with a cup of tea, looking at a book of poetry. She smiled at me, closed her laptop, and asked if I wanted to watch a movie together later, like we were sisters having a nice visit. Like she wasn't trying to rob me blind. "Sure," I said, smiling back. "That sounds lovely." The next morning, I drove into town to visit Officer Carter at the small sheriff's station that served our remote area. He was a kind man in his 50s, someone who had known my parents for years, who had helped Dad fix his truck more than once. "Harper," he said, standing up from his desk when I walked in. "I'm so sorry about your mother. She was a wonderful woman." "Thank you," I said, and meant it. "I actually wanted to ask you about something. I'm living alone out at the cabin now, and with it being so isolated, I'm a little concerned about security. Have there been any issues in the area? Break-ins, trespassing, that sort of thing?" He frowned thoughtfully. "Nothing major recently. Why? Are you worried about something specific?" I chose my words carefully. "I have some guests staying with me temporarily, and they've mentioned feeling uneasy. Strange noises at night. That kind of thing. I just want to make sure everything is secure, especially with all of Mom's belongings still there." "Guests?" He leaned back in his chair. "Family?" "My sister and her husband." I paused. "They arrived unexpectedly. I'm being hospitable, but honestly, Officer Carter, some of their behavior has been concerning. I'm not making any accusations, I just want to be cautious." Understanding flickered across his face. He had been a sheriff long enough to read between the lines. "I'll make sure to increase patrols in your area. And Harper, if you need anything at all, you call me directly. Don't hesitate." I left his office feeling more secure. The groundwork was laid. Now I just needed to build the rest of my plan. Back at the cabin, I began implementing what I privately called Operation Willow Creek. The name felt appropriately dramatic for what I was doing, which was essentially psychological warfare against my own family. But every time I felt guilty, I remembered that real estate listing. I remembered Lyra throwing away Mom's photos. I remembered Jax's smug face when he sat in Dad's chair. I started with sound. Mom had always loved wind chimes, the kind made of hollow metal tubes that sang in different tones depending on how the wind hit them. She had collected them over the years, and they were packed away in the attic. I retrieved the largest ones, the ones with the deepest, most resonant notes. and hung them in strategic locations around the property. Near the bedroom windows, on the back porch, in the trees closest to the house. On calm nights, they barely made a sound. But when the wind picked up, which it often did in Willow Creek, they created a symphony that could sound beautiful or eerie depending on your state of mind. I also found Mom's old nature sound machine, the one she used to use when she had trouble sleeping. It had settings for everything: rain, ocean waves, thunderstorms, and forest sounds. The forest sounds were what interested me. I set it up in the crawl space beneath the house, in a spot where the sound would carry up through the floorboards but be impossible to locate. I programmed it to activate randomly throughout the night: rustling, the occasional crack of a branch. Once in a while, the distant call of an owl or the howl of a coyote. Nothing overtly threatening, just enough to make someone lying awake in the dark feel like the forest was alive around them, watching, waiting. The scent was trickier. I didn't want anything obviously artificial. I went to a hunting supply store 2 towns over and bought several bottles of scent attractant, the kind hunters use: deer urine, wild boar musk. I diluted them heavily and placed small amounts near the exterior doors and first-floor windows. Not enough to be immediately obvious, just enough to give the subtle impression that animals were frequenting the area, checking out the house, getting brave. Then I started leaving the notes. The first one I placed on Lyra's pillow while she and Jax were out driving around town, probably meeting with their real estate agent. It was just a small piece of paper, folded once, with a quote from Mom written in careful print: "The trees know who tells lies." I watched from my camera feed as Lyra found it that evening. She picked it up, read it, frowned. She showed it to Jax, who shrugged dismissively. But she didn't throw it away. She tucked it into her pocket, and I saw her glance toward the window, toward the dark trees pressing close to the house. The second note appeared 2 days later, this time tucked into Jax's shaving kit. "What's taken freely must be returned with interest." He found it in the morning, and I was in the kitchen when he stormed down the stairs, holding the paper like evidence. "Did you write this?" he demanded. I looked up from my coffee, my expression carefully neutral. "Write what?" He thrust the note at me. I read it slowly, then handed it back. "That's not my handwriting. Is this some kind of joke?" "It's not funny," Lyra said from the doorway. She looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes. "If you're trying to scare us." "Why would I do that?" I interrupted, my voice calm. "You're my guests. Besides, this house has been in the family for generations. Mom used to tell stories about it. Maybe some of her old notes are just surfacing. She wrote things down everywhere." It was a lie, but a plausible one. Mom had been scattered in her later years, leaving reminders to herself on sticky notes and scraps of paper all over the house. They couldn't prove these messages weren't hers. Jax crumpled the note and threw it in the trash. "Whatever. This place is creepy." "Then maybe you should leave," I suggested sweetly. Lyra's eyes narrowed. "We're not going anywhere." "Suit yourself," I said, and returned to my coffee. That night, the wind picked up just after midnight. I was awake, as I often was now, monitoring the camera feeds on my tablet. I watched Lyra and Jax in their room, both of them lying stiffly in bed. The wind chimes started their song, a low, mournful sound that seemed to echo through the entire house. On the camera, I saw Jax sit up, listening. Lyra pulled the covers up to her chin. The nature sound machine kicked in right on schedule. The sound of movement through underbrush, branches snapping, and then, clear as a bell, the sound of something large breathing just outside the window. Lyra bolted upright. "Did you hear that?" Jax was already out of bed, moving to the window. He pulled back the curtain, peering out into the darkness. The motion sensor light I had installed days ago flicked on, illuminating the tree line. "Nothing, just trees and shadows and the wind chimes swaying in the breeze. There's nothing there," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "There was something," Lyra insisted. "Something big." I smiled in my dark room, watching them through the screen. This was just the beginning. Over the following week, I escalated gradually. The sounds became more frequent. I found a recording online of a black bear's warning huff and integrated it into the sound machine's rotation. I placed a few large paw prints in the soft dirt near the back door, using a mold I had made from a picture online. They weren't perfect, but they were convincing enough at a glance. I started waking up early to reset the scene each morning, erasing my own tracks, making sure everything looked natural. I would find Lyra and Jax in the kitchen, both looking exhausted, jumping at every sound. They started drinking the expensive coffee they had brought, going through it faster than they should have been, clearly using caffeine to fight their sleepless nights. "You look tired," I commented one morning. Lyra glared at me. "Something keeps making noise at night. Don't you hear it?" I shook my head. "I sleep pretty soundly. Must be the fresh air. Mom always said this place was peaceful." "Peaceful," Jax muttered. "Right." I could see the tension building between them too. Stress and fear have a way of exposing the cracks in a relationship. They snapped at each other over small things. When Jax suggested they cut their losses and leave, Lyra refused adamantly. She had been texting with Patricia Chen, the real estate agent. The plan was too far along. They were too invested. I found another conversation on Lyra's laptop, left open again. She was getting careless. They had been arguing about money, about who deserved what percentage when the house sold. Jax thought it should be 50-50 since they were married. Lyra thought she should get more since it was her family. The argument had gotten heated, with accusations flying about who contributed more to their relationship, who made more sacrifices. It was almost sad, watching them turn on each other. Almost. The confrontation came on a Tuesday evening. I was in the kitchen making dinner when they cornered me, both of them worked up and aggressive. Lyra slammed her hand on the counter, making me jump. "Admit it!" she shouted. "You're doing this, all of it! The sounds, the notes, you're trying to drive us out!" I set down the knife I had been using to chop vegetables and looked at her calmly. Doing what, exactly? Living in my own house? "Don't play innocent," Jax growled, stepping closer. "We know you want us gone. This whole creepy act, it's pathetic." I met his eyes without flinching. "You want to know what's pathetic? Showing up uninvited to steal your sister's inheritance. That's pathetic." The mask dropped. Lyra's face went white, then red. "How dare you?" "I found your emails, Lyra. The real estate listings. Your cozy conversations with Patricia Chen about how to sell property you don't own." I spoke softly, but every word landed like a hammer. "Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out?" Jax lunged forward, his hand reaching for my arm. I stepped back smoothly, putting the counter between us. "Touch me, and I'll have Officer Carter here in 10 minutes. Don't test me." He stopped, breathing hard. "You can't prove anything." "Can't I?" I smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. "I have screenshots, recordings, every word you've said in this house for the past 2 weeks, every plan you've made, every piece of Mom's property you've damaged or thrown away, all documented." The color drained from Lyra's face. "You've been recording us?" "This is my house," I said simply. "I can do whatever I want to protect it. The question is, what are you going to do now?" They stood frozen, the weight of their situation finally sinking in. But I could see Lyra's mind working, trying to find an angle, a way to spin this. She had always been good at manipulation, at making herself the victim. "We're family," she said, finally, her voice taking on a pleading tone. "Harper, please, we just needed help. Our finances have been tight, and when Mom left everything to you, it felt so unfair." "Stop," I held up my hand. "I don't want to hear it. You have 3 days to leave. If you're not gone by then, I'm taking everything I have to the sheriff and pressing charges. Trespassing, attempted fraud, whatever else my lawyer can come up with." "Your lawyer?" Jax scoffed. "You can't afford a lawyer." "Mr. Harrison has already agreed to represent me. Pro bono, actually. He was very disturbed to hear how you've been treating Mom's estate." It was a bluff, sort of. I had talked to Mr. Harrison, and while he hadn't officially taken my case, he had been very clear that I had legal grounds to act. Lyra's face crumpled. "You wouldn't really press charges. We're your sister." "You stopped being my sister the moment you tried to steal from me," I said quietly. 3 days. That night, the wind picked up into a proper storm. Rain lashed against the windows, and thunder rolled across the valley like artillery fire. I had been planning to ease off on my campaign now that I had confronted them directly, but the weather was too perfect to waste. I had one final piece of psychological theater prepared, something I had been saving for the right moment. The remote-controlled sound system I had installed under their window had one more track loaded. The recording of a large predator, aggressive and close. I had edited it carefully, mixing the sound of a bear's angry roar with the sounds of it tearing into something, branches breaking, heavy footsteps. I waited until they had been in bed for an hour, until I could see on my camera that they were both lying awake, tense, in the darkness. Then I activated the sequence. The roar started low, building to a crescendo that seemed to shake the walls. On the camera feed, I saw Jax bolt upright, saw Lyra scream. The sounds of destruction continued, something massive right outside their window, so close they could probably feel the vibrations through the frame. Jax was out of bed, running for the closet. I knew what he was going for. The old hunting rifle that had belonged to my father, the one he had found days ago and moved to their room for safety. I watched him grab it, fumbling with the action, his hands shaking. "Don't go out there!" Lyra screamed, but he was already moving toward the door. That was my cue. I picked up my phone and dialed Officer Carter's personal number, the one he had given me for emergencies. "Harper?" His voice was alert despite the late hour. "What's wrong?" "There's someone in my house with a gun," I said, letting fear color my voice. "My brother-in-law. He's panicking about something outside, and he's got my father's rifle. I'm scared he's going to hurt someone. Please come quickly." "I'm on my way. Stay in your room and lock the door." I did exactly that, then shut off the sound system and waited. Through my cameras, I watched Jax storm through the house, rifle in hand, Lyra trailing behind him in her nightgown. They went to the back door. and Jax flung it open, stepping out onto the porch with the gun raised. The motion sensor light illuminated an empty yard. No bear, no predator. Just wind and rain and the swaying trees. Jax stood there, getting soaked, the rifle slowly lowering as confusion replaced fear on his face. That's when Officer Carter's patrol car came screaming up the driveway, lights flashing. The sound of the siren cut through the storm. I watched from my window as Carter jumped out, his own weapon drawn, shouting for Jax to put down the rifle. What followed was chaos. Jax, panicked and confused, didn't immediately comply. Carter had to shout 3 times before Jax finally set the gun down and raised his hands. Lyra came running out, crying and explaining about the bear, about the sounds, about being terrified. I came downstairs slowly, wrapped in my bathrobe, carrying my tablet. Carter was handcuffing Jax, more as a precaution than anything else, while another deputy who had arrived secured the rifle. Lyra was hysterical, trying to explain, making everything worse. "Harper," Carter said when he saw me. "Are you all right?" "I think so," I said, my voice small. "I just heard all this noise and then I saw him with the gun and I panicked. I didn't know what was happening." "There was something out there," Jax insisted from his position face down on the porch. "A bear or something. It was right outside the window." Carter looked at me. I held up my tablet. "Officer Carter, I think you need to see this." We went inside, away from the rain. Lyra and Jax were brought in as well, Jax still in handcuffs. I pulled up the recordings I had prepared, the ones that mattered. The audio of Lyra discussing the sale of the house with her real estate agent. The video of them going through Mom's belongings and throwing things away. The screenshots of the emails discussing how to establish ownership. "These people are not guests," I said quietly. "They're trespassers who have been trying to fraudulently sell my property. I confronted them about it earlier tonight, and I think that's why they're so on edge." Carter's face grew darker as he reviewed the evidence. He looked up at Lyra, who had gone completely silent, all the color drained from her face. "Is this true?" he asked. We thought." Lyra couldn't finish the sentence. There was no good way to finish it. Jax tried to salvage the situation. "This is all a misunderstanding. Harper is twisting things. We're family. We were just trying to help." "Help yourselves to property that doesn't belong to you," Carter interrupted. "Miss Crane, do you want to press charges?" I looked at my sister, really looked at her. She was crying now, mascara running down her face, her expensive clothes rumpled and wet. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old bond we had shared as children, before money and jealousy had poisoned everything. Then I thought about Mom's photos in the trash. The casual cruelty of calling her belongings clutter, the way they had tried to erase her from her own home. "Yes," I said firmly. "I want them out of my house, and I want to pursue whatever legal action is appropriate." What happened next moved quickly. Carter called for backup to escort Lyra and Jax off the property. They were allowed to gather their belongings under supervision, but most of their things ended up thrown haphazardly into the U-Haul. Lyra tried to talk to me several times, switching between anger and pleading, but I had nothing to say to her. I stood in the doorway with Officer Carter, watching them load up, and felt absolutely nothing. Well, not nothing. Relief maybe. And a grim satisfaction. "You're sure about this?" Carter asked quietly. "Once we go down this road, it's going to be hard on everyone." "They tried to steal my home," I said. "My mother's home. What would you do?" He nodded slowly. "I'd do exactly what you're doing." It was nearly 3 in the morning when the U-Haul finally pulled away, its taillights disappearing down the dark road. Carter stayed for another hour, making sure I was secure, checking the perimeter, documenting everything for his report. Before he left, he handed me his card again. "You did the right thing," he said. "And between you and me, your mother would be proud. She didn't tolerate takers either." After he left, I walked through the house slowly, room by room, reclaiming every space. I opened windows to let in the rain-scrubbed air. I repositioned the photographs Lyra had tried to remove. I sat in Dad's armchair and felt it welcome me back. The next morning, I called Mr. Harrison. He was happy to take my case officially. Within a week, we had filed a civil suit against Lyra and Jax for attempted fraud, trespassing, and destruction of property. The case was straightforward with all my documentation. Their lawyer tried to negotiate, but I was done negotiating. The story spread through our small community faster than I expected. Small-town gossip is a powerful force, and apparently, Lyra and Jax had been bragging to people about their plans. When the truth came out, when people learned they had tried to con a grieving daughter out of her inheritance, the backlash was swift and severe. Lyra's friends stopped calling. The women from her book club dropped her without explanation. The couple they played tennis with suddenly had full schedules. In a community where reputation was everything, they had destroyed theirs completely. Jax lost his sales job. His boss, who knew my family and had come to Mom's funeral, called me personally to apologize that they had ever employed someone like that. The financial pressure on their marriage became intense. I heard through the grapevine that they had started attending couples counseling, but it didn't seem to be helping. They blamed each other. Lyra said it had been Jax's idea. Jax said Lyra had been the mastermind. In the end, it didn't matter who had thought of it first. They had both been willing participants. 6 months later, they were divorced. Lyra moved to another state, leaving no forwarding address. Jax drifted even further. Last I heard, he was working construction in Nevada. Neither of them contacted me again, except through lawyers. The settlement we eventually reached gave me everything I asked for: full reimbursement for damaged property, legal fees, and a legally binding agreement that they would never set foot on my land again. I received one letter from Lyra, forwarded through her lawyer. It was a strange mix of apology and resentment, words that seemed designed to make me feel guilty for defending myself. I read it once, sitting by the fireplace in the cabin, then I fed it to the flames. I watched the paper curl and blacken, the words disappearing into ash and smoke, and felt the last tie to my old family burn away. The house became mine in every sense. I spent the spring repairing the small damages they had caused, repainting rooms, refinishing floors. I planted a garden in the clearing where Mom used to have one, herbs and wildflowers and vegetables that thrived in the mountain soil. The wind chimes stayed up, but now their song was comforting, a reminder that I had won. I started a small online bookstore, specializing in rare and used books, operating it from the cabin. The business grew slowly but steadily. People liked the story behind it, the young woman running a bookshop from a cabin in the woods. Some of them even made the drive to Willow Creek to visit in person, and I started keeping a small reading room open a few days a week. It became a gathering place for people who appreciated quiet, for readers and writers and artists who needed a retreat from the world. Officer Carter stopped by regularly, just to check in. We became friends, in the way that happens when someone helps you through a crisis. He brought his wife once, a kind woman who admired my garden and left me with a jar of her homemade jam. They were good people, the kind my parents would have liked. One evening, in late autumn, I was sitting on the front porch with a cup of tea, watching the sun set through the trees. The wind chimes sang softly in the breeze. The air smelled of pine and approaching winter. In my lap was a book of poetry, the same one I had been pretending to read that day when I first discovered Lyra's plans. I thought about where I had been a year ago, standing in that funeral home, feeling lost and alone and helpless. I thought about the person I had been, willing to let my sister walk all over me because I was afraid of conflict, afraid of losing the last of my family. That person was gone. I had burned her away along with Lyra's letter, along with all the old obligations and guilt and false family loyalty. In her place was someone stronger, someone who knew how to fight for what was hers, who understood that sometimes the people who share your blood are the ones you need to protect yourself from most. The cabin in Willow Creek was mine. The life I was building was mine. The future stretching ahead, full of possibility and peace, was mine. Nobody would take that from me. Not ever again. A car came up the driveway, headlights cutting through the gathering darkness. It was a customer, someone who had emailed about a first edition they wanted to see. I stood up, set down my tea, and went to greet them, ready to talk about books and beauty and all the things that mattered in this new life I had claimed. Behind me, the wind chimes sang. The trees whispered their approval. Mom's voice echoed in my memory, telling me what she had always known. The trees know who tells lies, and they know who tells the truth too. They had been watching, and they had witnessed my victory. Inside the warm glow of the cabin, I was finally home. The months that followed brought a rhythm to my life that I had never known before. Winter settled over Willow Creek like a blanket, heavy with snow that muffled all sound except the crack of ice on the branches and the occasional call of a winter bird. I spent those months reading, writing, and learning to be alone without being lonely. The cabin became a cocoon, a place of transformation. I found boxes in the attic that I had never opened, things Mom had saved from my childhood, report cards with her proud notes in the margins, drawings I had made as a child, carefully preserved in plastic sleeves, a journal she had kept when I was born, documenting my first words, my first steps, her hopes for my future. Reading her words, I understood something I had missed when she was alive. She had always known what Lyra was. She had seen the jealousy, the entitlement, the way my sister measured love in dollars and possessions. There was an entry from when I was 12, after a particularly difficult family Christmas. Lyra, then 22 and newly married, had thrown a tantrum because our parents had spent slightly more on my gifts than hers, never mind that she was an adult with her own income. Mom wrote about the incident with sadness but also clarity. She worried about Lyra, about the emptiness inside her that no amount of money or things could ever fill. But she also wrote about me, about how I noticed when others were hurting, how I shared without being asked, how I found joy in simple things. The last entry in that journal was dated 3 months before she died. It read, "Harper will need to be strong. Lyra will test her. But my gentle daughter has steel in her spine, even if she doesn't know it yet. The cabin will protect her. The trees will teach her. She'll be all right." I cried when I read those words, sitting on the attic floor with snow falling softly outside the window. She had known. She had prepared me as best she could. The inheritance wasn't just a house. It was a message, a final lesson about standing up for myself, about recognizing my worth, about understanding that family is not an excuse for abuse. Spring came early that year, melting the snow in rushing streams that fed the creek behind the property. I spent weeks clearing the hiking trails Mom had maintained, cutting back overgrowth, marking the paths with painted stones. The work was physical and exhausting and exactly what I needed. Each day I grew stronger, more confident in my body and my ability to handle whatever came. The bookstore expanded naturally. Word spread through online book communities about the little shop in the woods, and I started getting requests from collectors and universities looking for specific titles. I developed relationships with estate sale companies, becoming known as someone who would drive hours to assess a library, who understood the value of things beyond their cover price. My specialty became finding homes for books that deserved readers who would appreciate them. I hired my first employee in June, a retired English professor named Margaret who had moved to the area to be closer to her grandchildren. She was sharp and funny and opinionated about literature in the best possible way. We would spend rainy afternoons arguing about whether Hemingway was a genius or overrated, drinking tea and eating the cookies she always brought with her. "You know what I like about this place?" she said one afternoon, shelving a new arrival of vintage poetry collections. "It feels honest, no pretense, just good books and someone who cares about them." "That's all I ever wanted," I admitted. She looked at me over her reading glasses. "Your mother would be proud, you know." I only met her a few times, but I could tell she was the kind of woman who raised her daughter right. The compliment warmed me more than I expected. I was building something real here, something that mattered. Not just a business, but a legacy of my own. Summer brought tourists to the area, people escaping city heat for mountain coolness. Some of them found their way to my little bookstore, drawn by the hand-painted sign I had posted at the main road. They would arrive hot and tired from hiking, and I would offer them cold lemonade and a place to sit in the shade of the porch while they browsed. Many of them bought books, but even those who didn't often left donations in the jar I kept by the register, marked for the coffee and kindness. I started hosting a monthly reading night, inviting anyone who wanted to share poetry or prose or just listen. We would gather in the clearing behind the cabin, sitting on blankets and folding chairs, watching fireflies dance while someone read Mary Oliver or Wendell Berry or their own original work. Those evenings became sacred to me, proof that beauty and community could grow in the space where pain had once lived. Officer Carter came to several of the readings, always sitting in the back, always staying for the cookies and conversation afterward. One evening, after most people had left, he approached me with an unusual expression on his face. "I got a call today," he said carefully, "from your sister's lawyer." My stomach tightened. What did she want? Apparently, Lyra is in some kind of financial trouble. The lawyer was fishing, trying to see if there was any way you might be willing to help. Something about family obligation. He paused. I told him I'd pass along the message, but that I doubted you'd be interested. I stared out at the darkening forest, processing this information. Part of me, the old Harper, felt a twinge of guilt. We had been sisters once, before everything went wrong. But that feeling was distant now, an echo of a person I used to be. "You told him correctly," I said finally. "Whatever troubles Lyra has, she made them herself. I'm not her solution." Carter nodded approvingly. "Good. I think you've got the right idea. Some people, you give them an inch and they'll take everything you've got. She had her chance to be your sister. She chose differently." "She did," I agreed. "And I've chosen too, to move forward, not back." He squeezed my shoulder in a fatherly gesture. "Your mom really did raise you right." After he left, I sat alone in the clearing, listening to the night sounds of the forest, crickets and tree frogs and the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. The sounds that had once been weapons in my campaign against Lyra and Jax now just meant home. I thought about the message from Lyra's lawyer, about the fact that even now, even after everything, she thought she could come back to me for help. The audacity of it should have made me angry, but instead I felt nothing. No rage, no satisfaction, no guilt. Just a calm certainty that I had made the right choice. Some bridges, once burned, should stay ashes. Some relationships are healthier dead than alive. Autumn came again, completing the circle of seasons since Mom's death. I marked the anniversary quietly, hiking up to the highest point on the property, where you could see for miles, where the valley spread out below in shades of gold and crimson. I brought flowers from the garden and a letter I had written to her, telling her about everything that had happened, about the life I was building, about the person I had become. I read the letter aloud to the wind and the trees and the vast indifferent sky, then I burned it, watching the smoke carry my words up and away. It felt like completion, like a ritual of letting go while also holding on to what mattered. She was gone, but she was also everywhere here. In the creak of the floorboards, in the way the light fell through the kitchen window at noon, in the strength I found when I needed it. The bookstore thrived. I hired a second part-time employee, a college student studying literature who needed work she could do while writing her thesis. I expanded the online presence, started a blog about rare books and mountain living that attracted a surprising following. People seemed hungry for stories about simplicity, about choosing peace over chaos, about making a life rather than just a living. I was interviewed for a regional magazine about women entrepreneurs in rural areas. The reporter, a young woman from the city, asked me if I ever felt isolated or lonely out here by myself. I thought about the question seriously before answering. I feel alone sometimes, I admitted. But alone and lonely aren't the same thing. I have friends, customers who've become friends, a community that supports me. And I have this place, which has taught me more about myself than any relationship ever did. I'm not hiding from the world, I'm just choosing to engage with it on my own terms. The article ran with a photo of me on the porch, surrounded by stacks of books, the forest rising behind me. I looked strong in that photo, competent and serene. I barely recognized myself. The frightened, grieving girl who had stood at her mother's funeral felt like a different person entirely. I had shed her like a snake sheds its skin, painful but necessary. Winter came again, my second in the cabin alone. This time I was ready for it, with a full woodshed and a pantry stocked with preserves and a dozen new books I'd been saving for the quiet months. I settled into the solitude like slipping into a warm bath, grateful for the space and silence. Christmas came and went without family, but not without celebration. Margaret invited me to her daughter's house for dinner, and I spent a lovely afternoon with 3 generations of people who genuinely liked each other, who laughed and argued and cleaned up together without resentment. It showed me what family could be when it was healthy, when it was chosen rather than obligated. On Christmas night, back at the cabin, I sat by the fireplace with a glass of wine and thought about my sister for the first time in months. I wondered where she was, what she was doing, whether she had learned anything from what happened between us. Probably not, I decided. People like Lyra rarely changed. They just found new victims, new situations where their entitlement might work in their favor. But that wasn't my problem anymore. I had spent too much of my life worrying about Lyra's feelings, trying to maintain peace, sacrificing my own needs to keep her happy. That version of Harper was gone, and I didn't miss her. What I had instead was this: a home I loved, work that fulfilled me, friendships that nourished me, and most importantly, self-respect. I had learned to set boundaries and maintain them. I had learned that being kind didn't mean being a doormat. I had learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away. The fire crackled and popped, sending shadows dancing across the walls. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and steady, blanketing the world in white. I thought about the year ahead, about the plans I had for the spring, about the life I was continuing to build, one choice at a time. I raised my glass to the empty room, to the ghosts of the past and the promise of the future. To Mom, I said aloud. Thank you for the cabin, thank you for the lesson, thank you for knowing I was strong enough, even when I didn't. The wind chimes on the porch sang softly in agreement, their voice a benediction. The trees stood sentinel in the darkness, keeping their ancient watch. And I sat in the center of it all, whole and healed and home, finally understanding what my mother had always known. Sometimes love means letting go, sometimes protection means pushing away. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the chance to stand on their own and discover who they really are. Mom had given me that gift, wrapped in inheritance and isolation and the hard lessons of betrayal. I had unwrapped it slowly, painfully, but completely. And now, sitting in her cabin, in my cabin, surrounded by books and memories and the promise of tomorrow, I understood that I had become exactly who she hoped I would be. Not perfect, not without scars, but strong, resilient, and most importantly, mine. My own person, living my own life, on my own terms. The snow continued to fall, the fire burned warm, and Harper Elizabeth Crane, sole owner of a cabin in Willow Creek, survivor of family betrayal, builder of a new life, smiled into the darkness and knew that everything, finally, was exactly as it should be.